Hi, this is Celeste, and this is the Celestial Report. And I don't know if you would consider what I'm going to be sharing with you as a treat, but it is a need to know, absolutely, because one thing I forgot to put in this is the link between you know what and what we're going to talk about today. And people, 9 million people globally die from neurological problems. And that is going to go up exponentially in the days to come. And keep that in mind. So that's 9 million people. It is the second largest cause of death around the world. So just be thinking of that. And we're going to go to the PowerPoint. Whoops, I got to share a screen before I get you to the PowerPoint. And let's see. Okay, slideshow. So today what we're going to be discussing is the human mind as a battlefield. And I know that each of you are feeling like it's a battlefield, but maybe you couldn't put your finger on it. So today we are going to talk about the technologies that are around us and that are aimed at us. I listened a week ago to a presentation given by Dr. James Gorodano by some NATO partners in Sweden, I believe, or in Stockholm, and about disarmament and stuff. And they were, and he was talking about the weaponry and was being very frank about it. The date of that, as you can see, if you want to look it up yourself, was December 15th, 2021. And there is a YouTube on that. And text brackets are my commentary. I try to use Dr. James Gorodano, who I fondly say is Dr. Evil. So you can distinguish between my words and his words. But sometimes what I was doing is cutting out his words and extracting his words. So they didn't always flow really well. So then I had to add words or even define words, because some of this are things that you've never heard before. So as an introduction, so there are technologies that many of those in the arms control or arms control community use. And these are, today we're only talking about the brain. And so one of those is brain hacking, hacking into your brain. I am going to be going into that in greater detail this month. Neuralink, most of you have heard that one. Super enhancements, that is done via drugs, bugs, devices, and gene editing. Super soldiers and brain-computer interfaces, if you're not familiar with that term, is linking the brain with AI or a computer. So right now, there are a lot of influence operations going on. There's not only PSYOPs, but there's also influence operations. And we're going to look at how extensive some of those are. And they are very subtle influences to the degree that you might not even notice that they're happening, or you may, it just depends. They can influence what you think, what you feel, and how you act. I gotta figure out where to put this. So it's very interesting. This is I follow Dr. James Gorodano's work, as well as some other people. And this is the first time that I saw links being made between science and the metaphysical and the spiritual. And they say that they are now, in the words of Dr. James Giordano, inseparable. And so what is the spiritual? That would be your soul. So then, just as a little going back, we refer to this as neuroscience and technology, neuro S&T, is the acronym. And basically, Dr. James Giordano says that that it is relatively inseparable between the science, and understanding the insights that we gain to the mechanism of the nervous system in the brain and what that infers for the functions of the brain, most broadly construed to be the mind, but perhaps more metaphysically construed to be identity. So this fusion of science and the spirit and soul will impact your identity, who you are, what is your self, your decisions, and your feelings. Like I said, this is really, truly the first time that I've seen in writing or speaking them linking science with the soul. So the expression of the same in a variety of different interactions, from personal to the political, but over and above that is this science has given man and machine the ability to assess the brain. All of us in the 1970s, they got the patents, have brain prints. And so they can actually pick us out from around the world with our brain print. You can see those patents online, and they can assess your brain anytime they want. They can access your brain right now anytime they want, and they can affect your brain anytime they want. And they have, like I said, bugs, drugs, devices, toxins that can and electromagnetic frequencies to be able to do that. Science has been capabilized by an increasing tool set, or a toolkit, if you will, a set of technologies. And capabilized means it's just as sorry, you guys. Post-nasal drip. It's so wonderful. Give me just a sec. So these particular technologies, Mississippi's hair, have allowed us to advance certain theoretical constructs about the brain. Unfortunately, those are not just theoretical constructs that remain in a computer. What they are doing is operationalizing those, deploying them, as we're going to learn. They have also taken us to the limit of our capabilities to assess and affect the brain. Now, remember, I'm speaking in the words of Dr. James Giordano. And if you're not familiar with him, he's the one that is intimately involved with the neuroweapons and is also hands-on as far as the policy and the educating for all the actors and players that are using the neuroweapons. Therefore, this has prompted the development of new tools, and that's what we're talking about today. They did have a toolkit, but just like Christmas, they got a new toolkit, and they are ready to unfurl it this year. This affords us the actual capability to harness and engage neuroscience and its technologies in what is increasingly become known as integrative scientific convergence. And that is defined as the AIC model, and it represents a viable approach to neuroscience beyond the simple multidisciplinary. The AISC model unifies constituent scientific and technological fields to foster innovation, invention, and new ways of addressing seemingly intractable questions. In this way, the AISC can yield novel methods that's new, never before seen, and foster new trajectories of knowledge and discovery, and yield new epistemologies. And it's really done under the umbrella of One Health. And right here you see the One Health. And that is the unification of environmental health, ecology, veterinary medicine, public health, human medicine, molecular and microbiology, and health economics. You're going to be hearing a lot about all of these topics that I'm discussing as we go along this year, not just in this presentation. What the AISC is doing is a relative de-siloing or mixing of the cross disciplines under the One Health, which we just saw that umbrella. And it's also known these days as precision medicine model. And basically it's uniting or fusing physical life, natural life, and the social science. And in doing this, it provides data for a more three-dimensional understanding of the brain and it's what its functions are and how they can be assessed, accessed, and affected. The 3 A's, they really want all of this, as well as the nature of those effects and that assessment. This is most probably aimed at what I would consider to be the low-hanging fruit. In other words, much of the driver of neuroscience is aimed at biomedical purposes, relatively for benevolent ends, wanting to do good to improve the human condition, to reduce the human predicament of disease, injury, and perhaps even frailties that are a consequence of our finitude, which is life and death and the aging process. But we're gonna see it's a lot. He's speaking a lot like the UN. You have to read in between the lines, and we are making this document available, or my transcript of it, and you know, feel free to look at the YouTube too. But it sounds really good and pretty on the outside, very benevolent, but we're going to get to the dark underbelly of this strategic plan in just a few minutes. However, what we consider as being a viable good can also be seen in certain ways as providing inequities. Now think about the current state. I don't care what country you live in, the inequity within your state or country, inequality, and frank engagements of harm and burdens to others. Sorry about the typo, you guys. So the picture that I got was at a transhumanism conference military conference that I went to in 2018. So they knew at that time, they said that there was going to be this divide. So they knew that they were going to be fracturing people, societies, cultures, doing these inequities, inequalities, harming some people, leaving other people alone, and burdening most of the population of the world. So what is good is, so then he's kind of doing a rhetorical narrative. It really is only a case of how we define good, and then whether that science and technology can be used in a way, now listen very carefully, that it is withheld from others to prevent them from accessing those goods. I'm going to read that again. That is withheld from others to prevent them from accessing those goods. Think about the food supply. Think about the supply chain right now, and that you are being withheld from accessing those goods. This is part of the plan, and it's part of the war against your brain. Enjoying those goods, they are going to, are you going to be able to enjoy those goods or not is going to depend on your compliance. Or can it be inverted and therefore used to incur burdens, risks, and harms to others? So once again, you see, remember he said, oh, it's benevolent, it's good. And now we're seeing it is going to incur burdens, risk, and harms. And he goes much deeper into that in just a few moments. I gotta see this, and I'm not seeing where my, okay, I hope that's the next slide. There it is. Okay. What we can see is that by understanding the brain and its processes, it gives us the capability of affecting human activities. These effects can influence a variety of postures, including the posture towards peace, the posture towards vulnerability, the postures of volatility, the postures of violence, and the bellicosity, which is defined as a warlike intent or to fight. Now, all of this is under the influence of what they can do with the neural weapons that they can deploy. And then I did put like this, it was hard to get an image of these postures. But for instance, here's what how music can impact the brain. And it would probably depend on what type of music you were listening to. Is it classical? Is it spiritual? Is it heavy metal? It would do different things to the brain. So once again, remember that they can influence peace, vulnerability, volatility, violence, and this warlike tendency with their neurological weapons. Now he gets a big smile on his face when he talks about this. The allure of using cutting edge brain and neuroscience technology in ways that could be leveraged in a variety of competitive engagements, from the economic all the way to war, is a reality. And so welcome 2022. This is what they are going to be doing this year, leveraging those competitive engagements. All the global actors are involved, and it will affect and ripple out, just as we saw with the World Economic Forum spike protein. It's going to affect all things. So what he is telling you about is not science fictional. It is science fact in terms of what is currently available or at high technological readiness level, so as to be made available within the next 2 to 5 years. It is operational, as you will soon see. It's akin to the polis, which is ancient Greece, or it can refer to the police or law enforcement, or some political agency or organizations, and then held as a viable good and can be used to justify the applications of these types of technologies and techniques, perhaps in somewhat more gray zone operations. And gray zones are like, we know what's right and what's wrong. We know what there's various treaties for sort of some different types of things like biological and nuclear weapons. Playing the gray means inside the middle. The neurosciences can also be paired to intelligence operations. So that's a networking of agencies, not only the intelligence operations, and can afford increased cognitive capability for intelligence operators. So those are the people that are spying on us and their systems to be linked to computational systems. So basically they are taking the different operations, they're taking the various agencies, they are increasing their cognitive capabilities because they are, plugging into the quantum computer, things that we don't have access to. And that makes it very difficult on us. It puts us at an extreme disadvantage. Because of the reality is that these tools and techniques offer viable and in some cases estimated valuable capability to what? Assess and modify the thoughts, actions, and therefore overall stature of others. And I thought that that was every word that Dr. James Giordano uses is by design. It is very purposeful. So I thought that stature plays this really important role in the Bible and in our society. Like how there's short people, and so that people think certain things about short people or tall people. So stature can refer to the natural height of a person and our upright position. The biblical definition includes greatness, with the measurement tie, like they would use instead of a yardstick or a ruler, they would use the cubit. And actually the cubit means a rod or staff, and it means to cut or cut off. And I just did an article about covenant. And if you haven't taken a look at that, that's at shepherdsheart.life. I found out that covenant, actually, one of the definitions of a covenant is it means to cut or cut off, and also to span time, as seen in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version, and the Vulgate. So the intent is to insert these operating systems into your body so that they can self-replicate and swarm, eventually taking over your body, turning you into a hybrid, then into a synthetic life form that is slated to be extinguished. Ultimately, you are cut off from the one true God whose image you were created in. Now, those are my words, as separate from Dr. James Giordano. The operational definition of a weapon, this is in the words of Dr. James Giordano, is taken from the Oxford English Dictionary, simply means a means of contending against others. Far more colloquial, some words I just can't say. It has to do with what I just went through. So we'll just pass those on. We see this in a bellicose, warlike framework. In other words, this means to injure, to impair, and perhaps kill others. He's being very frank there. So remember that the very first thing out of the gate, he said this science and technology is going to be used for benevolent good. And now he's talking about, it's really going to be injurious, impair us, and perhaps kill people. And that is the first thing that I saw when the certain thing was named, was that it was going to disable pretty much the whole population of Earth, either physically or mentally. It was designed as a neural weapon. Okay, going back to our text, but in its strictest definition, a weapon is some means of influence, deterrence. It's not influence. It's of influence of a certain nature, but it's there to, it's there as a deterrent. The question then becomes, can the brain science be weaponized in those ways that may be less lethal or non-lethal, yet their influence be overwhelmingly more powerful? So that's basically not whether it's a weapon or not, but just they're playing with the lethality of the weapon. And that's what we're seeing right now on the stage. And we have been seeing for the last couple of years, them kicking the tires on that. In that the effects are getting at the essence of what it means to be relatively inviolable space of the self, of identity, of mind, of being. So it's basically, they're trying to get at into the essence of what it means, your identity, yourself, your mind, and your very being, and be able to perhaps control the thoughts, emotions, and your behaviors. And they're going to do it remotely. And I have been talking about that for 2 years now, that this was the plan of putting these platforms into your body, and the whole electromagnetic frequency that we are facing is our influence weapons, and they are going to influence certain groups of people. So let's find out who they are. They are going to influence individuals, groups, collectives, and populations. So that means, let's say you are a hiking club, and the elite have decided that they don't like hiking clubs. So you are going to either be influenced or disabled so that you can't hike anymore. They may put those gates up and trench out the things so you can't walk, with putting cameras up. We see that in Washington State. Collectives. I hate to put religion in a collective, but it's a group of like-minded people. They could go after a certain religion or a certain ethnic population with these weapons. Is there some line that's being crossed whereby this cognitive liberty is being intruded upon? And I don't think that we've really ever just stopped and thought for a few minutes how much in the last 2 years our cognitive liberty has been infringed upon, that we no longer have the freedom to think our thoughts even. I mean, we have learned that it's dangerous to protest. We've learned that it's dangerous to speak out. But now we're facing this time where even what we think, we will not have the liberty to be able to think it, even the secrecy of our own mind and in our soul. And they can do this remotely. Once again, through frequency and these platforms that they've inserted into the population. So when I say we, it's not me. These are the words of Dr. James Scorodano. We can frame the neuroscience into domains, and I've talked about those domains, and those tools could be weaponized in such ways. Generally, we can parse these into 2 non-mutually exclusive interactive domains. One is the assessment neurotechnologies, which include things like various forms of neuroimaging, like the things you're familiar with, the MRI and the CAT scan, and the neurophysiological recordings, such as wearable biosensing devices like your Fitbit. Neurogenomics, and that is the study of how the genome of an organism influences the development and function of the nervous system. So you see, these gene editing things can influence our nervous system. This field intends to unite functional genomics and neurobiology in order to understand the nervous system as a whole from the genomic perspective. There's also neurogenetics, and that is the current areas of research are very diverse in their focuses. One area deals with the molecular processes and the function of certain proteins, often in conjunction with cell signaling and transmitter release. And we're going to be talking about that on Wednesday's webinar, and cell development and repair and neuronal plasticity. And that's the ability of your brain to heal and repair itself. And then there's epigenetics, which is the study of your behavior and environment and can cause changes that affect the way that your genes work. It's really important that we keep our pure human genetics, because our RNA does certain expression of epigenetics, and it is very powerful. The problem is when we get edited, it is actually disabling us rather than having the full power. It's basically akin to eating a whole fruit instead of just having vitamin C. Not that vitamin C is bad in itself, but when you have the whole fruit, you're getting vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients that are not available in single type things. And then there's phenotypes. Those are an individual's observable traits such as height, color, eye color, and blood type. It's also this whole phenotype is very evolutionary. So you're going to have to watch out when they start talking phenotypes and clades. Be careful, because it's a very slippery slope, and they are doing directed evolution and experimental evolution, all these experiments. And so you really, if you see the phenotype or clade, be very careful with what you're being presented with, because it is evolutionary. I guess if I have to say, if you think of one trigger word when you see phenotype, think evolution. There's neuroproteomics, and that is the study of the protein complexes and species that make up the nervous system. And these proteins interact to make the neurons connect in such a way that they create the intricacies that the nervous system is known for. Neuroproteomics is a very complex field, and it is, but they're plugging away at it. Okay, the second is that they want to tap in and use neuro big data. And most of you know what big data is, which is coupled with decision-making technologies and machine learning and AI, and it creates an omnibus juggernaut of the capability to not only acquire data and utilize the data, but also to manipulate the data itself, whereby the assessment immediately can turn into effect. And what have we noticed? We've noticed that the election, for one, is one of those areas that can be manipulated. Hold on. I wasn't ready to do that. Okay, the omnibus is defined as a vehicle for transport. It's really important, and I'm going to be presenting this month a lot of new material for you, and material that it's like an alien landscape. And so I really need to set that foundation so that you know what we're talking about, line upon line, precept upon precept. A juggernaut is defined as overwhelming or an unstoppable force, the Hindu god. One either devotes himself or is blindly sacrificed. And so that's what Dr. James Giordano is saying, that this link between neurodata, AI, creates this omnibus juggernaut capable of acquiring data to be an unstoppable force. Utilize that data, manipulate that data. And if you do not blindly devote yourself to whatever they come up with, you will be blindly sacrificed. Okay, this then brings us into the realm of interventional neurotechnologies. Perhaps the first and foremost, if not easiest, is the ability to use excellent systems of computational technology, that is pretty much AI or the quantum computer, and engineering together with decision technologies, big data acquisition, and use in various forms of soft and hard AI to manipulate the data themselves, and by manipulating the data on large scale. So it is scalable. So that means that it's scalable down to your molecular and cells, all the way up to the international level and beyond. So I just did this article yesterday on painting a new reality and how they can play with paint. And I did not put this in the article, but I will share it with you. So on September 30th, I was doing something much like I'm doing right now. I was on air for an hour and 45 minutes. And all of a sudden I started getting a headache on the top of my head. And I only had 15 minutes left, so I continued on. But at the same time, whether it was in the spirit or whether it was something I literally saw because of the frequency, I don't know. I can't explain it, but I saw my lungs being painted, literally painted. And I thought, well, that's really strange. And by the time I got off air, climbed the stairs, I was getting chilled. And in an hour, basically, I had the symptoms of the you know what that's going around. So is it real? Is it not? What Dr. James Giordano's take, and if you look up painting, cell painting, they have this technology through frequencies to be able to paint a new reality for you, for me, for anyone else. And that also explains why there are so many different symptoms right now, because each person can be painted a different way. So cell painting is a powerful application of high content screening technology that combines cell and computational biology to elucidate the behavior of cells under the influence of perturbations such as chemical compounds, drugs, genes, or other entities. So they can even paint other entities into your body. This is why we need to be especially careful and use the armor of God, because now they are at the point, like I said, they are they're starting to impinge on the area of the soul of the human. So you need to be aware of that. And this particular image here was taken, Dr. James Giordano has used it for many years. I think the first time I saw it was in 2018, maybe more, I don't know. They can implant information into large-scale databanks. And now this is going to be a little bit scary for some of us, all of us maybe, into large-scale databanks. And what are they going to do with that information? Make individuals appear to have certain neurological and psychiatric conditions. Not that they have it, but that they are going to insert the data so that it will appear as though these individuals have neurological or psychiatric conditions that is going to affect their capability to do their job by virtue of, if you will, their data profile. So you may, depending on what type of job you have, it may You may be able to work your job, or you may not be able to work your job. By affecting aspects of the metadata so that they're regarded and perhaps treated in different ways, economically, socially, militarily, and politically. So, what bottom line? They are going to insert false information regarding neurological and psychiatric conditions into your background, not necessarily yours, but it's possible, that may affect your job and is going to impact you economically. Of course, if you lose your job, that's economic. Socially, people don't like to hang out with other people that are considered crazy people. Military is going to treat you different because you're not a safe person, and politically. So you're basically, they're eating away at self, your identity, who you are as a person. And you need to know that this is very, very real. He's actually talked about it several times, but never so succinctly. But wait, there's more. And that's what he said. Wait, there's more. The more we know, the further that we can go. One of the existing concerns is that the ubiquity of what I call biodata, particularly neurobiodata, creates certain vulnerabilities and targetabilities to be able to create precision pathogens. And that's what I was just talking about with the painting of the cells. Those are precision pathogens that are painted onto you by frequencies. Those pathogens need not be the traditional drugs, bugs, or toxins. They can also be certain devices that can be tuned to individual perimeters of anthropometry, physiology, to differentially affect individuals in a variety of ways, to direct or compromise their capacity for thought, emotion, and action. So basically, they have these devices that they can turn on, and they set certain perimeters. Like they say, okay, I want this person's thought. They can't think anymore. Or I want Sally's, she can't have emotions, or she's depressed all the time, or she's angry all the time. Or let's say they turn this device on and it prevents you from doing certain actions. Let's say you are a conservative and all of a sudden they make you into this flaming liberal overnight, actually instantaneously, just by flipping a switch. They can do that now. And so that's one reason we need to give grace to people, because it may not be them when they're acting out. It could be these weapons. So basically what they have is this new legal toolkit. And I want to emphasize, just like during the Holocaust and World War II, it was totally legal. This is a legal toolkit. So putting all these together, we see a new toolkit that is essentially engages not only those domains that have been well addressed by the current language of biological toxins and weapons conventions and various declarations of signatory treaties, but in some ways they have sidestepped that into those gray areas, and which he hopes to show us. New drugs, for example, that are able to penetrate the brain space far more capably and at much lower doses. For example, now they can link pharmaceutical Whoops, sorry about that. They can link pharmaceuticals to those nano engineered, which come to you courtesy of hydrogel and quantum dot, the micelles and the chaperones, which we learned about in the Homeland Security biostasis and my dark winter presentation, that allow facial penetrance into the brain. And sometimes that means it can be clandestine or covert, which means somebody sitting somewhere sends that frequency and they can activate those scaffolds or the chaperones or the micelles, which are those, they're kind of like those little hydras that Dr. Carey talks about. So grow tissue and bone, including limbs and organs. That's the good part of it. And the nano scaffold is a three-dimensional structure composed of very small polymer fibers. It also is building this nano scaffolding, which this really is a pick hydrogel or quantum dot or something like it into your body. So now we're going to talk about what are these micelles? They are like the high, they're also aggregation molecules, and they are coherent strands of structure in natural cadavers. So they look, like an octopus. So that's different. And then the chaperones that the biostasis and land security about is any group of proteins, molecules or bigger molecules such as protein and nucleic acid to fold to the proper three-dimensional structure as they are being synthesized. It's all peptides and very
Celeste, we got some tech issues here. Lost your sound completely, so we can't hear you. Do we have a break point where we could break this webinar and come back with a second? Because we've got a lot of delay in the signal at the moment. You're muted at the minute, so if you can unmute, that'd be good. Can you unmute? Can you hear me?
okay. Can you hear me?
Okay,
John?
I can hear you now, yeah.
So basically, I lost everything. They kicked me out of Zoom.
Well, you're still in Zoom, aren't you?
Yeah, but they just kicked me out. I just got back in. So I don't know. Do you want me to continue?
Well, we're still online here. We're still functional, so you can continue.
Okay.
You lost your screen share, but you are back, so we can carry on.
Okay.
Go for it.
We will try to get back to where I was here from the current slide. Okay. So we have been having technical difficulties. I'm sorry about that. So let me start back with the chaperones, just in case I'm not exactly sure where I left off or where I was cut out. Any diverse group of proteins that assist macromolecules, those are bigger molecules, are such as proteins and nucleic acid, to assemble and fold into proper three-dimensional structures.
Can you go back a little earlier, Celeste? Because we were having trouble before that. So if you could go back a little bit further in your presentation, that'd
Like
be great.
here,
I can't see the actual picture. I
that's
recognize it from the
a
picture.
totally new legal toolkit.
Yeah, go back to the totally new toolkit bit. Start about there, just after you started talking about that, and then it started, just signal started fading.
Okay. All right. So this is a totally new legal toolkit, just like in during World War II, that was totally legal. And this is a new toolkit that they are rolling out for 2022. And what is it going to include? It's going to include new drugs, for example, that are able to penetrate the brain space far more capably and at much lower doses. For example, they can link pharmaceuticals to the nano engineered scaffolds. Those are those things I always talk about. The micelles, which is what you're seeing with Dr. Carrie Madej's work, and the chaperones, which is what I talk about, and Department of Homeland Security with biostasis, that allow for facile penetrance into the brain space, and sometimes through means that can be rather clandestine or covert. So he's telling you that these are clandestine and covert operations, and they involve the engineered scaffolding, the micelles, and the chaperones. Now let's find out what those are.
Celeste, can you share screen again? We lost your screen share in that shuffle around.
No screen share. Okay, now I got to get out and then I got to get back in. Keep this up. Okay, let's go back to screen share. Sorry about that, everybody. So much fun. Okay. Is everything okay, John?
Yep, we're good now. That's actually better. So this is not bad.
Okay. So the nano scaffolding is a medical process used to regrow tissue, bone, and including limbs and organs. The nano scaffolding is three-dimensional structure composed of very small polymer fibers. That is the approved, but they also use it for many other things, like turning you into a hybrid and a synthetic entity. The micelles, and this again, these are the medical definitions, but they have it's dual use and weaponized language. So there is another, you have to know the other language. So submicroscopic aggregation of molecules and coherent strands or structures in a natural or synthetic fiber. Now those are those micelle, or like the jellyfish that Dr. Carrie Madej talks about. And also, okay, what is it with the fibers? Morgellons. And the thing is, these are coherent, and they seem to have some type of intelligence to them. The chaperones I first found out about in a biostasis Homeland Security, but this is the politically correct definition. Any of a diverse group of proteins that assist macromolecules such as protein, nucleic acid to assemble and fold into proper three-dimensional structures as they are being synthesized, also called a molecular chaperone. So be very careful. If your doctor puts you on peptides, you have to realize what's going on behind the scenes. Many peptides are being gene edited with tardigrades and the resurrection plant. And again, I've done a lot of presentations, both DARPA and HDIAC. You can watch video on YouTube about the biostasis program where they're talking about that. Why are they doing that? because they are looking to the stars, and supposedly looking to the stars, they want to make people be able to live without water, live without air, be resilient in very vacillating temperatures. That's what they say. But really, if you look at the UN, and they don't want us to drink water, they don't want us to have air, they are basically mutating us. And I am going to be covering part of that mutation process this month, maybe even Wednesday. So you want to stay tuned for that, so that you don't need all these things that they consider. So basically, we won't be human at the end. So they want to penetrate your brain very easily. And when I looked up the scientific term, it means it is the presence of a gene that always results in disease. That is, so when they do these gene editing and when they access your brain, it always, it says, results in disease. So now we're going to get into the targeting of individuals and groups. So these new drugs can be deployed, and they will be deployed via inhalation, which means they have aerosolized everything that they want to aerosolize, which my big concern is the hydrogel and the quantum dot, because those put platforms into your body that build the scaffolds, and then they can do all this remote access to your body, but also transdermally through the skin. So, I'm touching something and it goes through my skin. My skin is actually the biggest organ in my body, and you are not going to believe, I'm going to go into how fast this invasion can take place, and how fast this can affect you. So stay tuned on Wednesday for that information. So targeting these pharmaceuticals to be able to work in key individuals or groups of individuals. So see, they're going to start with the key people, the influencers, and influencer people, groups of people that influence other people. And they're going to use these based upon their understanding of pharmacogenomics and the dynamics of that. So here too, we see the ability to generate novel microbiologicals, and those are new edited microbiologicals, and they are in the bacteria, fungi, and viruses. Increasingly, Dr. James Scorodano says there is a worry about the potential weaponization of prions. That's like mad cow disease. And I mean, it's already bad enough. Prion disease is horrid, and they're going to weaponize it. So keep your eye in 2022 for the weaponization of prions. That based upon individual, collective, and populational information can be developed so as to high selectivity, affecting, as I mentioned, key individuals, individual targets of high value, as he puts it, globally and more universally, creating, if you will, a bellicose, warlike value across the globe, and universally benign and generalized targets like the general population. So basically, he was saying the general population is going to get hit, but maybe not with the veracity. And he used that word bellicose, maybe 20 times in this 1 hour, a little bit over an hour presentation, this warlike. So they're really going to go after the influencers and key individual targets with a vengeance with these new weapons. They also want to deploy genetic weapons by autonomous vehicles. That goes in line with the new DARPA project. I can't think of a name, where there's a bunch of, if you saw Slaughterbots, there's that with the little drones. What is the name of that? It's a jet, the Valkyrie, and out comes all these little drones. So I did an article on that, but I'm micro managing news right now. So it's hard for me to go back to the big picture. So as well as we can utilize various methods of gene editing and synthetic biology to develop organic neurotoxins that are far more stable and effective. Neurotoxins, and they're going to gene edit them and use synthetic biology. I mean, those neurotoxins are already bad enough, and then they are going to use these with precision when delivered by a variety of unmanned vehicles, aerial, ground, and sea and land-based. A variety of technological devices that can be used to augment or change cognitive capacity. For example, things that can be donned or doffed, things that can be put on. Doff is to remove or discard. And these can include things like transcranial magnetic electrical stimulation, which is a neurophysiological procedure for non-invasive stimulation of the nervous system. That is, unless you're the one that they have invaded with this transcranial magnetic and electrical stimulation. It involves the application of a rapidly changing magnetic field to the superficial layers of the cerebral cortex, to which locally induces small electric currents known as eddy currents. There's also vagal nerve stimulation. I've seen a lot in the journals about this vagal nerve stimulation. I haven't really dove into it too much, but now that I know that they can do it remotely, that's more concerning, and I'll probably have to jump into it at some point. But it's the vagus nerve stimulation, involves the use of a device to stimulate the vagus nerve with electrical impulses. An implantable vagus nerve stimulator is currently approved by the FDA, but you also need to know that they can do this remotely with the platforms and frequency. Now, one of the most alarming things that he stated was that they can now remotely read and write to your brain. That's because most people already have the platforms, which are operating systems in their body, and that those platforms cross the blood-brain barrier, and now they can read and write to your brain. And they said that there is going to be a robust move, that's in 2022, to move forward to create these implantable devices. And most of people think it's the RFID chip. It's not going to be the RFID chip. That's old technology. It's hydrogel, quantum dot, and the microneedle array that most of you know already about. They consider it non-invasive or minimally invasive at their implantation, so as to create the next generation of neuromodulation that allows for real-time access to read the living brain and write into the living brain remotely. That's why I have pleaded with you, do not get these platforms into your body, either through a pharmaceutical, through food that is contaminated with it. We just all have to be really careful. I know that's going to be very difficult in the days to come, but we have to give it a try. So such a capacity with this ability, I think, also comes the necessary in authentic anticipation, and in some cases, anxieties and apprehensions. So to the people with the weapons, they're kind of excited about this new toolkit. But for those of us that are hearing about this and that it's imminent, it's at the door, it might produce some anxiety and apprehension in us. At present, multiple large-scale national brain science initiatives are pouring billions of currency units into the brain sciences. So they have tons of money it's like the brain is the next and maybe even last frontier. Again, the most notable direction of these, the driver, clearly is explicit. Those things that are benevolent, wanting to do good, this is what they're going to tell us, they're benevolent, wanting to do good, reduce the burden of human predicament and disease and injury capability. But that capability curve exists along a spectrum. And he's been very frank with that it can cause people to be separated, it can cause you to become disabled, and it can even kill you. So, you know, he talks on one way, this way, he speaks with forked tongue. So here too, the ability to utilize the brain sciences to improve our quality of life, which the acronym for that is QOL, just in case you need to know that or see it, and or to use the brain sciences in preventative ways immediately, and allows us to confront again the idea of occupational, preventative, military, and intelligence. Basically, they want to use this ability to read and write your brain in medicine. That's for the average person, and also for the key people that they want to target. They want to endow super soldiers and the proverbial super spooks for intelligence operations. What good and for whose good? Dr. James Giordano admits that it is my good may not be necessarily be your good, and what I and my kin hold to be valuable and defensible may not in fact be what yours defines to be so. And so the use of advancing tools and science and technology inclusive of the brain and the cognitive sciences in those initiatives and agendas that may be used in defensible ways, or in some cases explicitly offensive ways. These weapons have the power to decapabilize a person. That means you are no longer a capable person, either in your mind or your body. They can, section it out, slice and dice. They can make you completely incapable, a vegetable, if you will. They can reduce your will. They can rob you of your will to live, your will to go to work, your will to interact with your family, your will to oppose their agenda. It's really a big deal to reduce our willingness to, let's say, participate in our republic form of government, our willingness to go along with their agenda. They can modulate that, and they can take away what we are willing to do. They can reduce our cognitive abilities, our ability to think. I know I was kind of hit with that, and it's really no fun. But I'm still here and kicking, so that's good. To reduce physical capabilities, and that was what they said when they first named the weapon that I talk about frequently. They said that the first thing that you would notice is a global disability, both in the body and the mind. And I thought that was interesting as they were naming it. And they could advance towards some level of volatility or violence is very, very real. So look for volatility and violence this year. Starting this year, it's going to start intensifying. And unfortunately, we've got these people playing with this new toolkit, but we also have the cyclical cycles of the sun. And that also will increase people's agitation and their ability to do all these things, even if we didn't have humans doing it to us. So there's a fusion of everything taking place. Fusion is the buzzword for the next couple years. Fusion of government, commercial markets, and the brain sciences, the advancing developed nations and giving them certain capabilities to leverage the brain sciences in and across fusions of the government initiatives, research initiatives, and commercial initiatives that at the very, very least could leverage the brain sciences and economics to create new balances of power on or for the medical markets, and perhaps even lifestyle and the military markets. So we are going to see this fusion of the brain sciences. We're going to see countries coming together. We're going to see the medical company or medical coming together in this brain sciences enterprise, if you will, and as well as the military markets, and it's going to affect our lifestyle. Weapons ready for prime time. Now, back in the NASA strategic warfare 2025 document, it talked about the capture and torture of Americans in living color in prime time. And, that was a long time ago. And, we thought, oh, they'll be on TV, but actually these weapons are ready for prime time. So they're using the same prime time theme. So they knew all along the way that the playbook would be. And so now they're telling us that these are ready to go 2022, new toolkit, we're opening it up. So developing these capabilities in brain sciences that would weaponize, but actually putting them into play. Case in point, things like the Novichok poisoning, which means newcomer, by the way. That's because it was a newcomer in the package, the Nano Bio with the payload package that I talk about. The use of a variety of organic toxins are still somewhat controversial, and consideration of the use of various types of neurologic directed energy weapons. And that is what I believe that I was hit with on September 30th, and it's coming your way. I think it becomes important to recognize that these things are ready for prime time. The technological readiness level has been indeed acknowledged and appreciated by a number of worldwide groups, not only ours within the Human Brain Project. Remember, this is Dr. James Giordano speaking, the World Health Organization, UNESCO, and most recently NATO. We must pose these questions. Who is harmed? Who is not? And are there certain aspects of these neurosciences and technologies that are indeed malum or bad unto themselves, and therefore they should be arrested or restricted? I do not see that happening, because there's always the dark agencies that will keep them going. We've examined what this sort of ethics for Pandora's box might actually obtain and entail. Now, this really just blew me out of the water. What they want us to have humility and gratitude to the systems in place. Really? So Dr. James Giordano was saying that the real question is cashing in, or the real, let me start over on that one. The real question is in cashing the reality check of our perspective, relative humility, and perhaps our gratitude to the systems. These are these systems that are going to change everything in our life neurologically and maybe even kill us. And we're supposed to be humble and grateful to those. Yikes. That we have in place at this point, remain prepared and ready for what shall come. What comes next? Well, I think we need to cash the reality check and understand neurobioeconomic savvy. So there is a lot of money to be made in the biologic economy, or the weaponization of the brain. And it's going to start with redefining who you are as a human. And I've been trying to tell people this is about redefining you as a human. And now Dr. James Giordano is reiterating that. The respect for the human person is countered very often. Yes, there may be respect for the human person, but we define the human person differently. So that's how they get away with things like consent, informed consent, because they define that you're really not a human, so you don't really have the rights of a human. So they also define human dignity differently. So our culture is more of a collective rather than one that is sort of liberal or an individualistic culture. This is in his view. Our culture is more generational than short-term and temporal. As a consequence, all of these factors need to be capitalized and need to be incorporated into an authentic, realistic, and genuine approach, not only to ethics that may give rise to certain permissivities or constraints in research and translation. The brain sciences affords us the ability to assess, gain information from the individual or from the living brain in both individuals and groups, and interpret that information in ways that have meaning. But how do we know that they are accurately interpreting that information? We have no verification on that. They can make up anything that they want because they are not really accountable to us. Very often we ascribe the meaning as to what these technologies are telling us. We use that information in two ways. One, we use that information itself, the neurobiodata, which means the more that I know, the more I can get insight into the way that your brain works, the way that your brain functions and dysfunctions, where your relative strengths are, and where your relative limitations are. And two, then able to accommodate or at least access those different capabilities on an individual or collective basis. And I would say that they're not only accessing, but they are going to harness that information and your capabilities and use it as a weapon formed against you. And so you have to have spiritual force field up. This was another scary one, you guys. I got to figure out where to put this. Homo sapien technus. By humans are tool users, I mean that this is part of our natural history. Yeah, we may call ourselves Homo sapiens, but the reality is that we are Homo sapien technus. We've risen to the relative top of the evolutionary ziggurat by virtue of our not only evolutionary capabilities biologically, but to augment that biology through the use of tools. A ziggurat is an ancient Mesopotamian temple tower consisting of a lofty pyramidal structure built in successive stages, with outside staircases and a shrine at the top. Inclusive of those tools that we use to interact with each other cooperatively and competitively, the brain science is no different. So basically they say man has always used tools. The brain science is no different than any of these other tools. And we are now Homo sapien technus. The ability to affect the brain structure and function allows inciting capability on a variety of scales, from the subcellular all the way to the sociopolitical, from the personal all the way to the political and military power level. And so that's what I've been trying to convey for a couple of years, or more than a couple of years now. There's great power in doing that. There's the power of control, the power of assessment, the power of insight, so they know what really you're thinking. And so what we really see is that the brain science affords us the capability to leverage power on an intimate level that also raises the capability of power to an almost infinite level, like godlike. Scary. So the big toolkit, because as we link the brain sciences to other forms of what we'll call influence technologies, very often previously referred to as disruptive technologies, and you mentioned a couple of computational system narratives, ubiquity of information, artificial intelligence, and decision technologies, the capability to affect individuals' cognitions, emotions, and behaviors via various images, narratives, and presentations that we know to be salient. Therefore, meaningful and effective, as well as perhaps more direct ways of the use of, if you will, drugs, bugs, toxins, and devices becomes a rather large toolkit and a very important one. So what keeps Dr. Evil James Giordano up at night? I guess I'm buried within that question is sort of implicit. Okay, what keeps me up at night? You know, the convergent sciences are very important to address the key questions where the limitations of one discipline are approached to another. It affords, if you will, fresh eye on the target, and we are the target, and fresh eyes on the task. But I think one of the things that happens there too is that the capabilities of different disciplines allow multi-capability expression of ways could achieve. So what we're able to do is essentially use some other technological or ethics, and we put them together, such as neurocyber, microbiology, neuroanthropology, where the neuro really used as a representation of our capability and our limitations in brain science and are. When you these, they essentially work as force multipliers, and that's the bottom line. These, as far as military and the government, the brain sciences.
Okay, we dropped your connection, Celeste. Dropped you out. You got to re-put your mic on. We lost your connection completely. So you're muted at this moment. Hold on, folks, and we'll see if we can get Celeste back in just a minute. Hang on a sec. Can you hear me, Celeste? Hello? Celeste, can you hear? Okay, good. All right. Try your mic now. Gotcha.
Okay. Am I okay?
You're good. I can hear you now. That's good.
Okay. We're almost done. We're coming into the let's see. Uh-oh.
You're going to have to reshare your screen share. Lose your screen share whenever that happens.
Okay, hold on. Okay, sorry about that, you guys. We're coming into the close. It's just so much fun. So what else gives Dr. Evil the most pause? I'm particularly worried about gene editing techniques and gene editing techniques, particularly when coupled to synthetic biology. But he's doing it. It just drives me crazy. If that keeps him up at night, gene editing techniques and then coupling gene editing with synthetic biology, then why are they doing this? Particularly when applied to neurocognitive dimensions, offers unique capabilities to be able to affect the structure and function of the nervous system, affecting those organisms that have a nervous system in a variety of ways, rather subtly, and at other times more severely. Do you see what he's saying? He's affecting not only maybe our nervous system, but let's say there's a nervous system in some creature, such as a parasite that might be implanted into us, or some other novel entity in us. They can influence the neurology of those subtly or very severely. That's quite alarming. This thing is not wanting to behave today. I'm also worried about the pairing of neural systems with computational systems. That's the merging of your neurological system in your brain with a quantum computer. Well, that's a no-brainer, but he is the number one person putting it into action. So I don't know. I don't know what to say about it, but we're really seeing is a reciprocal augmentation of the human operator and the increasing capabilization of the machine component. So we're basically augmenting and enhancing robotics, and we're kind of going down. What you are really getting is a truly cybernetic organismal system where you're having dual cooperativity and reciprocity, and therefore you are delimiting the aspects of both systems. Cybernetic is the science of communication and control. I'm not going to read all that because you know what a cybernetic at this point. The issue is at some point you will get a relative functional fusion between human cognitive abilities with that of a machine and the capability of the machine to the human cognitive abilities, inclusive of insight to the human emotionality, intentionality, impulse response, and which can be engaged with the machine. If we take humans either out of the loop or on the loop or out of the loop, to have considerable effect on the way a non-biological system that may be cognitive in its capacity and an AI system affects the dynamics of human individuals and populations. So this is my belief, my biblical worldview, is that we are talking about the beast system here, a non-biological system that may be cognitive in its capacity and one with AI system, and it's going to affect every human on planet Earth. I must tell you, although we in the United States, Europe, and many of our international cooperators are very concerned about keeping the proverbial human in the loop or in the loop, or at least on the loop. But they're not really. I put this in because I thought you might want to know about the China question. How are they working with China? Not, China's doing this, Russia's doing this, the United States is doing this, they're all doing it. So this will give you an insight. Our Chinese colleagues, and I use the word in a complimentary sense and in the most accurate sense, they're in league with these enterprises, as we are. They have defined various goods, various rights and wrongs within their research conduct and its expression into translation. that in some cases do not comport with the long-standing post-Enlightenment or classical philosophical and ethical values of what previously was referred to as the West. Of course, you know, they're not even saying we're the West anymore. So development of the technologies in academia, research, and government. New neuroscience is influential, but could be rendered against individuals using various forms of neuroscience and neurotechnologies. Neurotechnologies include various forms of directed energies, various forms of chemicals, the development of nanomaterials to assess their effect upon inorganic and organic substances, including a human, for occupational safety and health, or so they say, even if it kills you, can be taken up into warfare, intelligence, national security agendas, if and when those infrastructures of a nation are indeed relatively seamless and fluid. The incorporation into what may then be these agendas of national security, intelligence, and defense are facile, easy. In other words, the government structures where there is a relative separation between the government initiatives that may fund certain areas of the brain science. So just like borders, they want this seamless and fluid incorporation of the brain sciences. It doesn't matter what country, if you're working on brain science, you're all just one big happy family. And with that, we did make it through. We did make it through the presentation. And if you have any questions, I can endeavor to answer them if you have any.
Celeste, yes, there are some questions here. Maybe we'll get a few more once we start answering these ones here, but these are the ones that I have here. Is this insertion a physical reality or a manifestation linked to you and others' perception of you?
It's a physical, it is physical. It's a physical reality.
Okay. Let's see what else we've got. Should we now be using stored foods? Somebody wants to say, can we trust any foods in organic stores? I don't think that's directly relevant to the webinar, but anyway.
So at this point, they have completed putting the platforms in. I would say probably 99% of the food. It's not labeled, so you're not going to know what doesn't have the platform in it. There might be a few foodstuffs out there. The only truly safe way is to grow your own. And if you do have stored food, then that might be a good idea, but that's something to pray about, and it's a personal decision for you.
Okay. Okay, let me see. I'm not seeing any more actual questions here. There's comments. Oh, there's a question about an NFL player who removed his shoulder pads and undershirt and jogged to the locker room during the third quarter. Seemed very bizarre behavior. And this person felt it sounded like a brain to computer interface technology. Your thoughts?
I didn't see it, so I don't know. I mean, it could be that. It could be, you know, it's on the heels of the holidays. So it could be, you know, just stress or letdown. But with frequency, it's very possible.
Somebody asked, speaking of the war on the brain, would silver-lined hats or caps help protect your brain?
I don't know about silver. I know that Mylar is effective, and there are some like you can look up anti-EMF fabrics They make, there's a whole, I saw one time at one of the conferences, I think it was Singularity University, all these beautiful garments like capes and hoodies and all sorts of clothes that repel frequency. So it's the time to be looking into these. There's frequency blocking paint. There's all different manner of things. It is the growing trend. So if you want to be safe, we need to be thinking about ways to protect our brain and body.
Somebody wants to know, does nano silver help in any of this?
So I really see maybe come to the Wednesday webinar. I'm not going to get heavy into the metals, but I'm going to start diving in a little bit into the metals and why I'm concerned. They can be manipulated. That's my only concern. Yes, we do need some metals, and traditionally, like gold and silver, have always been used for healing, but these days they can be manipulated. And so that's my concern, is that with some of these new technologies, we may be shooting ourselves in the foot by taking them. It's what it is called a wicked problem. It's like, oh, so you treat one thing, and so it might be very good, but you actually aggravate something else. That is called a wicked problem.
Okay, there's a couple of questions that reference these implantable devices. The first person writes, family members have been receiving transcranial neurostimulation for ADHD or depression. This is provided outpatient or with a home unit. Is this possibly linked to what you're talking about? That's the first question in that realm.
Yes, it's similar, but now they can do it remotely also.
Okay, so somebody else wants to know, why are they making a, quote, robust move forward to create implantable devices, end quote? In other words, why do they need implantable devices if they can do all of this to our brains remotely, or am I misunderstanding?
Because they need the platform. They call it a device. I call it a platform to be able to access your brain and body to the degree that they want to. They can access it somewhat, but they want total control. And so they call it a device. I call it a platform. And they need to get it into your body one way or another.
Somebody makes this comment. My friend had a headache the other day, and she held up a sheet of tinfoil over her head, and the headache stopped.
Very interesting. See, it doesn't have to be a weapon. And we've all got electromagnetic pollution going on in our homes. You know, we've got routers and cell phones and, you know, low orbiting satellites and Doppler radar. There's just a ton of electronic pollution out there. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a weapon, but it does mean that she's sensitive. And there are people that are allergic to the electromagnetic radiation. And those people need to really make a safe room with no electronics. Don't put anything with electricity. And really, you might consider some paint that is EMF. It repels it or blocks it.
Somebody's wondering if this is already happening through the pathogen juice. This person notes they reopened their business in October, and people are much more disrespectful, self-entitled, and angry compared with how business was, say, 2 years ago. People seem really childish, and anger seems to trigger easily. Is this already happening? This person wants to know.
Yes, it is. I think that they were have been beta testing since 2020 early on, various psychological operations, but also dipping into this. This isn't what I'm saying by 2022 is we're going to notice a significant uptick in these and maybe some new things starting up with they only told about the unclassified operations. They you know, there's also classified operations that he did not go into. So we only know part of what's going on.
And there's a question here about med beds, if you know anything about that, and also a question about whether Rife frequencies can cleanse ourselves. This person writes.
So I don't know anything about med beds and Rife. It can be somewhat beneficial, but you know, you have to know the frequencies, that type of thing, and we're getting into uncharted territories. So what used to work maybe 20 years ago or 10 years ago with a Rife machine may be different these days.
Okay, I think that pretty much concludes the questions I have here, Celeste.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank each one of you for your attendance. I'm sorry that we had so many technical difficulties. I suspected that we were going to have a few technical difficulties. It just when certain people come on you just know you're going to get a little bit of interference, and so there's no way to prepare. You just kind of have to go with it and persevere, and that's what we did. I do really want to encourage you to attend Wednesday's webinar. There is an operation that I did that is shocking, and it was right under our noses. And it is not about the brain, but it is about biological modification. And so please join me. It is at noon, just kind of Central Time. And we will see you, hopefully, God willing, on Wednesday. Thank you.